Welcome to Modern Homestead Alaska. I am Jessica, and today we are diving into the fascinating question, can you still get free land here in Alaska? It's a bit complicated, but if you stick around, I promise I will share some tips and tricks and ways that you can acquire land here in the state. Not only that, we are going to share our story of how it is that we came to live on an actual homestead awarded through the Homestead Act of 1862. It's all very fascinating. Won't you join me? Alaska has always captured the imagination of many, and here the spirit of those who came before lingers in the air, and their stories echo in the whispers of the wind. One such story, a poem written by Susan White. We built our log cabin upon a rise where there were views of mountains and skies that formed the background across the lake where the children could swim, in winter could skate. There were trees to clear and wood to saw to keep us warm when it turned cold and raw. We built a shed to keep the wood dry, which we sawed and split and stacked up high. Sometimes at night, when the moon was full, we'd watch out the windows where all was still. The sheen on the water with the mountains behind made a better picture than any you'd find. With little ones safely tucked in bed, there was ample time to plan ahead. The fireplace we'd build, the gardens, no doubt, no end to the things one could dream about. The cabin was rustic, both inside and out, and except for the clearing, thickly wooded about. And sometimes when we drive in through the trees, there were often moose or a bear to see. Then when the winter cold arrived, we found many things to do inside. Games were played and books were read, and we always gave thanks for our daily bread. As I mentioned in the opening, I live on an actual homestead that was acquired through the Homestead Act of 1862, signed by Abraham Lincoln. And right here, still on the property, is one of the original cabins that was built in order to meet the requirements to acquire this land. The Homestead Act of 1862 allowed American citizens to claim land, provided they improve it over 5 years. They had to live on the claimed land for the most of the 5 consecutive years, live in a habitable dwelling, a tent wouldn't count, and cultivate 1/8 of the land. Alaska's first homestead was awarded to a man with the last name Abbott in 1901, and the research says he must have been a military veteran because he didn't have to do the whole 5 years of improvement. Apparently, that was a way to get the land faster. And in fact, the story of our homestead was due to the same military clause. Many of the military folks that secured homesteads sold the properties directly after to fishing or even mining companies. That, however, is not the case for the homestead and the land that I am on. To understand the history and significance of the place that I live, I needed to take a look back, and some of the things I found was prior to the Homestead Act of 1862, there were other programs. However, Daniel Freeman is considered the first person to file a claim under the same act that continued to grant land claims until 1986. He did so on January 1st, 1863 in the Nebraska Territory. It wasn't for another 38 years that Abbott would claim land in Alaska. Even though Alaskans were late to the homestead game, the Abbott homestead claim was still awarded to him a whole 58 years before Alaska even became a state on January 3rd of 1959. Before the Homestead Act of 1862 was effectively repealed in the state of Alaska on October 20th, 1986, Kenneth Deardriff was the last to receive a homestead. He applied for his land in 1974 and secured his grant in 1988. and was the last person in all of the U.S. and Alaska alike to receive a homestead through the Homestead Act. Kenneth received 80 acres of land on Stony River in southwestern Alaska. Part of the fame that's attributed to Alaska and homesteading is due to the fact that the Homestead Act was repealed in the lower 48 in 1976. Because Alaska was a newer state, they extended it an additional 10 years. So those who were still determined to homestead during that time could only do so here. So can you still get free land to homestead in Alaska? No, you can't, not through the Homestead Act of 1862. However, if you are still seeking land, do not lose hope. Alaska has some unique programs. One such program is the Alaska Land Act, which allows the state to sell parcels of land. However, it isn't free land, and I'll share a few other ways to obtain land here in just a moment. First, I would love to share how we became modern Homestead Alaska on an original piece of land that was awarded to the Peterson family. Fun fact, only 3,277 homesteads were actually awarded in Alaska under this act, totaling 363,775 acres of Alaska's total 365 million acres. We can make it easy and say that less than 1% of Alaska is homestead land in the traditional sense, but that doesn't quite put into perspective exactly how low that is. The actual percentage is 0.0009966 of the state actual homestead land, making it quite rare to live in a piece of land that is a homestead under the traditional meaning of homestead. To make it more special, the family that homesteaded this land still owns part of it. And other than Aaron and I, everyone that owns land connecting to this lake is connected to the original family, the Petersons, in some way. Not only was very little land given in the state through the Homesteading Act, a vast majority was given through that military clause, and most of those folks turned right around and sold it to the mining and fishing companies like I mentioned earlier. Those companies weren't interested in the dwellings that they built, and the dwellings were built out of natural resources like logs. So most original homesteads here have gone back into the ground that they came. And until I was researching this and making this video, I didn't realize just how incredibly special the cabin down this homestead lane is. One of the two original families that homesteaded this land, their child still lives in this cabin today. It was never sold to mining or fishing or any other kind of operations. In fact, it was kept in the family. The lane has been kept alive in the history of homesteading. Won't you join me at my neighbors? Let's meet them. These are my neighbors, Bill and Kathy. After marrying over 50 years ago, they came to make their home on the very same land her family had homesteaded.
When they were pretty older.
Nice. How old were you when you all came out here to do this?
I was about 10.
Really?
Yeah. And I was the oldest of 5 kids.
You were the oldest of the 5. Yeah. How old was the youngest, or was the youngest born yet?
My sister was probably a year old. Lloyd was
He worked for the Corps of
Engineers. And my dad at that time was selling life insurance, I think, at that time. Oh, you're right.
They were both veterans.
They were both veterans, so they only had to stay, I can't remember how long, but...
I think it was 7 months.
We actually stayed longer because I think my parents couldn't afford to move back right away. Things were tight, but... Yeah.
Kathy came to the homestead when she was just 10 years old. She accompanied her parents, her younger siblings, and her grandparents even came to help set things up. They left behind bits of their history and their memories in documents and paintings and poems. One of the poems left by Kathy's grandmother reads, "Kathy, our oldest, was both sweet and shy, laughing often at the younger fry, sometimes baking cookies 2 days in a row, and got best grades in school, you know. Now Dick was often hard to find. He found things to do of every kind. With Jim to help build a treehouse high and help split the wood we piled to dry. A barrel of questions was quiet-voiced Jim, ready and willing to work, that's him. Still always ready to join in the fun of cowboys and Indians with his toy gun. These 3 oldest practiced, and their mother too, to be good shots with the .22. When the can fell down, there was laughter and shouts as to who was the better shot thereabouts. Scott was the red-headed who liked to tease, bright as a button, if you please. Into everything he would be, full of mischief at only 3. The youngest, Sally, was a quiet girl with a wide blue eyes and golden curl. Of all the 5, which brought us more joy, the 2 lovely girls or the 3 noisy boys, by Susan White.
Talks about when Lloyd Peterson built this. He received the notice of allowance, that must have been official, on November 5th, 1959. He put in the road immediately and footings for the cabin, and November 10th began cutting logs for the cabin, because all these logs are from this property.
Yeah, that is, Jenny and Carolyn told me that they cut it off the property and then he hand peeled them.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And your parents did it without even a chainsaw. I read it.
Hired Herb Alex to cut logs and peel. December 1st, I think it says, lay floor, joist, and subfloor. December 15th, hired Fritz, to help lay logs for the cabin. February 4th, began to build trusses. February 15th, hauled out trusses. February 28th, completed roofing. March 7th, began to install doors and windows. I'm just like...
This is the winter.
In the winter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And nobody plowed the roads or anything. I don't know how.
That's kind of amazing to me.
That he did all that.
That he did all that.
In the wintertime.
Hearing Kathy's stories about what went into making this homestead a home, how a community worked together and neighbors helped one another out, and how they all came together to put in roads and clear the land, saw the logs, and build these homesteads. The women worked well together as they moved their children to live on the land while the husbands stayed in Anchorage to work. It is not lost on me the hard work and dedication that it took these families to secure this land in the wilds of Alaska. They tamed it, and now we're able to just access our property through the roads built by her own father's hands. I am in complete amazement of how we've gotten to where we are today. I think an entire video should be dedicated to just what Kathy's family and the Peterson families did in order to secure this property. We don't have time for that today, so we'll get back to the video. Thank you, Kathy, for this time. Thank you, Bill, for opening up your cabin and your home for us to get a glimpse of what went into making a homestead a home here in Alaska. Well, that was such an amazing visit with my neighbors. I can see why they built the cabin where they do. They have the amazing mountain views as well as the lake and the forest, and it's just absolutely incredible. And that brings me to my experience of how we became Modern Homestead Alaska and to live on this beautiful property. When we came seeking Alaska, we weren't looking for free property, although that would have been nice. It was about actually living the homestead life of old with some modern conveniences, like off the homestead jobs, electricity, access to the home via a road system, not through the ways and means the Peterson and White families. But still, I deeply wanted to learn to garden, and I have. I wanted a dairy cow, and our cow is due with her first baby in May, and we will have fresh milk on the homestead. I wanted to raise both egg-laying and meat chickens. We as a family wanted to hunt, fish, and forage for wild things. We desired a life that had a short distance between our food and our plate. We wanted to live at peace and be satisfied by building it with our own two hands. I wanted to design the kitchen and cook off of a wood cook stove. And we wanted it to provide for the whole family. We wanted it to be a family affair, and it is all that and more. If you came to this video seeking your piece of homestead land here in Alaska and you're undeterred by the fact that it isn't free, I have some ideas of ways that you could go about finding a unique piece as well. The first way I'm going to suggest is research remote parts of Alaska. Now, keep in mind, remote life is its whole own thing up here, and I'll link a video at the end. It looks like this, that really shares with you the difference between on-grid and off-grid remote and the different things here. And it's a great example of some of the challenges that you may face living remote. However, remote land is a whole lot cheaper than land that is on the grid. So make sure you check that out if that's something you could possibly do. The second recommendation I have here is join local social media. Keep in mind, Alaska is really far behind when it comes to the way that they sell and do things. And oftentimes in local Facebook groups like Newbies Move to Alaska or the Marketplace, people will sell pieces of property that have never been listed on the MLS or Zillow or Realtor or any of the big places that you might be going and looking online. If you're really dead set on living in Alaska, I'm going to recommend you go on Facebook. It seems to be the most popular, and join some groups. That is a great way of finding properties that you wouldn't be able to find otherwise. The third way I have is to check out state resources. I will leave a link in the description box that you can go to. And sometimes the Department of Natural Resources often lists land available for purchase here. Again, things are not found national on websites like Zillow and Realtor, like I mentioned earlier, but we do have a state website where they will list lots of land, plots of land that are for sale via the state or something like that. Check out auctions. Believe it or not, our state or our borough will actually auction off land, and they're not always connected. So make sure you know exactly what part of Alaska that you are interested in, because it may not be a widespread sheet that says here's all the land in Alaska for sale. You may have to go borough by borough and check each and every one out in order to find those sort of things. But Alaska will auction off land, and so that is a good way to maybe get a piece of Alaska a bit cheaper than you could on the open market. The fifth option you have is you could actually do it like we did. We came to Alaska, we drove around, We looked on things like Zillow and Realtor, and we found this property listed online. We drove by the driveway, and from that point, we got real estate agents involved. It's important to note that we were not looking for a home like this. The original dream was a small cabin or land, a much more traditional vision of what living in Alaska would look like. But when I stood at the end of the driveway, I knew it was the one. It was the quietest place I had ever stood, and I literally heard a single drop of rain roll off one leaf onto another. And I knew in that moment, whatever was on the other side of the gate, I could see was my place of peace. But like all good things, it's worth the hard work it took to get here and the work it still takes today. And while you cannot still get free land here the way that the pioneers once did, if you're willing to put in the work and the effort, there is still land available. It takes hard work and dedication to secure something and build a homestead here in Alaska, and yet that hard work is all worth it. You are paid off in dividends getting to live in one of the most beautiful, bountiful places on earth. So for those of you considering a move to Alaska or starting your own modern homestead, remember, it's not about the land, it's about the adventure and the lifestyle you build. I'm re-energized after this to make sure everything we do on this homestead brings value to the land and respects those who fought through the toughest conditions to secure it. And I hope this homestead serves as a reminder to those who will come after us of the spirit of those who took on Alaska against the odds and ended up on the right side of life in the most beautiful place on earth. Our homestead is incredibly unique, and yes, we do get to call it a homestead in the traditional sense, as well as the modern idea of a homestead. Did you see what I did right there? Make sure you join us on the journey by hitting the subscribe button. We would love to have you be part of what we're doing here in our little corner of Alaska. Be blessed and grateful, and we will see you the next time.